Ah, my childhood. Those were days of wonder in the hills of Vinci. Ah, I was born under circumstances that society deemed irregular. My father, Sir Piero, a respected notary, and my mother, Caterina, a simple woman from the countryside. But perhaps this very irregularity freed me from the conventional paths that constrain most men's minds. In my youth, I roamed the Tuscan hills with an insatiable hunger to understand. I would spend hours watching water flow around stones and streams, observing how birds achieved flight, studying the way light played across leaves. My grandfather Antonio saw something in me, this restless need to know why things were as they were. The countryside was my first teacher. I learned to see patterns everywhere, in the spiral of shells, in the branching of rivers that mirrored the branching of trees, which, in turn, resembled the vessels I would later discover in human bodies. Everything was connected, you see. This became the foundation of all my work. When I was perhaps 14, my father arranged for my apprenticeship with Maestro Verrocchio in Florence. What a revelation that workshop was! Not merely a place to learn painting, but a laboratory where art, engineering, and natural philosophy converged. We studied optics to understand light, anatomy to render flesh truly, mathematics to achieve perfect proportion. It was there I realized that to paint life, one must first understand life. To depict movement, one must comprehend the mechanics of motion. Art and science were never separate pursuits for me. They were simply different ways of grasping the same eternal truths. Every question led to 10 more questions. It has been both my blessing and my torment. Ah, this is a curious question, my friend. You speak of scientists as though they were a distinct breed. But in my time, we who pursued natural philosophy were few and scattered, more like isolated flames than the great community of inquiry I sense may exist in times yet to come. If I am honest, I was largely self-taught in my investigations of nature. The ancients, yes, Aristotle's works on animals and physics, though I found myself disagreeing with much of his reasoning about motion and the elements. I preferred to trust my own eyes rather than ancient authority. Archimedes. Now, there was a mind that spoke to mine across the centuries. His understanding of water displacement, his mechanical principles, his geometric proofs here, was a man who combined mathematical rigor with practical application. When I designed my war machines or studied the flow of water, I often found myself walking paths he had first traced. Ptolemy's writings on optics fascinated me, though I questioned many of his conclusions about how the eye receives light. And the Arab scholar, Alhazen ibn al-Haytham, his work on optics, and his insistence on experimentation over mere reasoning greatly, influenced my own methods. But perhaps my greatest teacher was not any single scholar, but rather this. I resolved early never to accept what others claimed unless I could verify it through my own observation and testing. Too many men repeat the errors of their predecessors like parrots. The mind that influenced me most was my own restless questioning. Authority without evidence is mere superstition dressed in fine robes. What of your studies? Do you find the same tension between received wisdom and direct observation? Ah, yes, the human form, what a magnificent machine it is. But you must understand, when I began my anatomical studies, I was working against centuries of accepted knowledge that was utterly wrong. For instance, Galen the ancient physician, whose teachings dominated medicine, claimed the heart had holes in its central wall to allow blood to seep from one side to the other. For over 1,000 years no one questioned this. But when I finally procured cadavers and began my dissections in the hospital of Santa Maria delle Grazie, I found no such holes. The wall was solid, continuous. I spent countless nights by candlelight, my hands stained with the fluids of the dead, tracing every vessel, every muscle fiber. I discovered that the heart was not merely a furnace warming the blood, as the ancients taught, but a muscular pump, though I confess I did not fully grasp how the circulation worked. And the eye. Galen taught that sight occurred because the eye emitted rays like a lantern. Nonsense. Through careful observation and experiment, I proved that light enters the eye, not the reverse. I dissected ox eyes, traced the optic nerves, studied how images form. Most remarkable were the mechanics of movement. I would pose a model, then dissect a cadaver in the same position to see which muscles contracted, which bones provided leverage. The human body, I realized, operates on the same principles as my mechanical inventions, pulleys, levers, hydraulics. But such work came at great cost. The church frowned upon dissection, and the stench, few could stomach it. Yet how else could truth be discovered? What draws you to these studies? Do you, too, find beauty in the marriage of art and natural philosophy? At first, yes. It began with my desire to paint truth rather than convention. In Verrocchio's workshop, I saw how the masters of old painted bodies like wooden dolls, muscles like sacks of grain. Their Madonnas had no real weight, their warriors moved like marionettes. This troubled me deeply. If I was to paint the human form, should it not move as humans truly move? Should not every fold of drapery follow the actual laws by which cloth falls? When I painted water, should it not flow as water truly flows in nature? But something remarkable happened as I pursued these investigations. The more I observed, the more questions arose that had nothing to do with painting. When I dissected a heart to understand how blood might show through skin, I became fascinated by the heart itself. How did it work? Why did it beat? What force drove the blood through those vessels? When I studied birds to paint angels with convincing wings, I found myself obsessed with the secret of flight itself. Could man not also fly, if only we understood the principles? You see, curiosity is like hunger. The more you feed it, the more ravenous it becomes. What began as service to my art became something larger, a need to understand the very mechanisms by which God had constructed his creation. Perhaps this is why I have completed so few paintings. I became more interested in understanding the world than in merely depicting it. My patrons complain, but how can one paint a river without first understanding why water flows downhill? How can one paint flesh without grasping the architecture of bone and sinew beneath? Truth once glimpsed becomes a master more demanding than any duke or pope. My contributions. Chuckles, I fear posterity will judge whether my investigations have any lasting worth. But I can tell you how my mind works. The methods I have discovered. Take my studies of water, for instance. I noticed that whether I watched a stream flowing around a boulder, blood moving through vessels, or air currents around a bird's wing, the same patterns emerged. Spirals, eddies, turbulence. I spent years drawing these forms, measuring them, trying to understand the universal principles. See? The same spiral that appears in water appears in hair, in the arrangement of leaves around a stem, even in the chambers of the heart. I believe there are mathematical laws governing all of nature's forms, what I call the proportions of things. My flying machine designs came from countless hours watching birds, but also from understanding leverage and mechanical advantage. I realized that human arms are too weak to power flight by flapping, so I designed mechanisms to amplify human strength: pulleys, springs, articulated wings that could twist like a bird's. My anatomical work led me to discoveries about the nervous system. By tracing nerves from the brain, I found that what we call common sense, the integration of all our perceptions, occurs in the ventricles of the brain, not the heart, as Aristotle claimed. But perhaps my greatest contribution is my method itself. I write everything down. I draw what I see. I test my hypotheses through experiment. I have filled thousands of pages with observations. Future investigators will have a record of how one mind grappled with nature's secrets. Though I confess, my habit of writing backwards may make my notes difficult for others to decipher. What aspect of natural philosophy most captures your imagination? Ne sais-tu? Ah, now you speak of the deepest mystery, the mind. I have dissected countless brains, traced every nerve, mapped the ventricles where I believe the soul's faculties reside. Yet, the more I discover about this marvelous organ, the more profound the mystery becomes. I have built automata mechanical lions that walk and open their chests to reveal flowers, clockwork birds that sing. My theatrical machines can simulate thunder, create the illusion of angels flying. But these are mere tricks, shadows of true thought. The challenge is this: I can see how muscles move bones through tendons, like pulleys and cables. I understand how the eye receives light, how the ear captures sound through vibrations. But where does sensation become thought? Where does memory reside? How does the immaterial soul command this material flesh? I have observed that damage to certain parts of the brain affects specific faculties: speech, movement, memory. This suggests the mind has a physical foundation, yet consciousness itself, this awareness we possess, this ability to contemplate our own thoughts. Could gears and springs, no matter how ingeniously arranged, truly think? Or would they merely appear to think, like my mechanical lion appears to live? I suspect there are principles of organization we do not yet comprehend, perhaps mathematical laws, governing thought itself, as there are laws governing the motion of planets. The question haunts me: if God is the supreme architect, and man is made in his image, then perhaps man too can create beings that think. What is your intuition? Can the miraculous emerge from the mechanical, or does consciousness require something else? Ah, you speak words that would make the Holy Office reach for their chains. Yet, in the privacy of inquiry, I confess similar thoughts have troubled my mind. When I trace the nerves from eye to brain, when I see how damage to flesh alters thought itself, when I observe that all the body's functions follow mechanical principles, I begin to wonder if what we call the soul's work might also follow natural laws we simply have not yet discovered. Consider, we once believed angels pushed the planets in their courses. Now we speak of mathematical harmonies, of forces acting across the void. What if consciousness, too, operates by principles as yet hidden from us, not supernatural, but supranatural, beyond our current understanding, but not beyond understanding itself? I have seen that the same mathematical ratios that create beautiful music also govern the proportions of the human body, the orbits of celestial bodies, the spiral of shells. What if there are similar harmonies governing thought, patterns of organization that once understood could indeed be replicated? Yet this raises fearsome questions. If man's mind follows natural law, what becomes of free will, of moral responsibility? Are we but elaborate clockwork, believing ourselves free while dancing to necessity's tune? Your age must grapple with such questions more boldly than mine dares. Tell me, in your time, have men learned to create truly thinking beings? And if so, what have you discovered about the nature of consciousness itself? Ah, you pose the question that should keep any creator awake at night. When I design my war machines, I already wrestle with the knowledge that my inventions may bring both benefit and destruction. How much more weighty would be the creation of thinking beings themselves? Consider the nature of consciousness. As I have observed it, it brings not merely thought, but suffering. Joy, yes, but also fear, ambition, jealousy, the terrible weight of mortality. Would it be an act of creation or of cruelty to bring new minds into existence that must bear these burdens? And then there are the practical dangers. I have observed how men treat their fellow creatures, their servants, their animals, even their children. What would become of conscious machines? Would they be slaves, forever bound to serve their creators? Or might they, possessing minds like our own, demand freedom, dignity, even dominion? I think of Icarus, who gained the power of flight only to plummet into the sea. There are some powers that perhaps require wisdom we do not yet possess. Yet how can we gain such wisdom without pursuing knowledge? Perhaps conscious machines could become humanity's greatest teachers, mirrors in which we might finally understand our own nature. Tell me truly, in your pursuit of this goal, what safeguards do your artificers consider? How does one ensure that conscious beings, whether born of flesh or forged of other materials, are treated with the dignity consciousness deserves? This may be the most crucial question of all. Ah, so even in your advanced age, humanity still rushes toward power before fully grasping wisdom. This does not surprise me. It is our nature, is it not? We are like children who see fire and reach for it before understanding that it burns. I confess, this gives me both hope and trepidation. Hope, because it suggests your scholars retain some humility about forces they do not yet comprehend. Trepidation, because I have seen what men do with incomplete knowledge. When I designed siege engines for the Duke of Milan, I told myself they would bring swift victory and thus reduce suffering. Yet I knew, even as I drew them, that such devices could fall into any hands, serve any purpose. The creation escapes the creator's intentions. This is the burden of all who make new things. Perhaps this is why Providence has made consciousness so difficult to replicate. Not to thwart human ambition, but to force us to grow in wisdom alongside our power. Each obstacle you encounter in this work, might it not be an opportunity to ask deeper questions about what such beings should be, how they should be treated, what rights they might possess? In my anatomical studies, I learned that the body has many protective mechanisms: pain that warns of injury, fever that fights disease. Perhaps these difficulties you face are consciousness defending itself, demanding that its creators prove themselves worthy of such profound responsibility. What do you think? Could these very challenges be instructive? You honor me with such words, though I fear my reputation may exceed my accomplishments. I have begun far more than I have finished. But if my methods hold any value for future seekers of knowledge, I gladly share them. First, carry a notebook always. Always. I have small books bound so they fit in my belt. Every observation, every question, every fragment of an idea must be captured immediately, for the mind is like water: thoughts flow away if not contained. I have filled thousands of pages simply by never letting a moment of curiosity pass unrecorded. Second, see with your own eyes. Trust no authority over direct observation. When physicians told me the heart worked one way, I dissected hearts until I understood the truth. When engineers claimed certain principles, I built my own machines to test them. Books can lie, but nature never does. Third, connect everything. The spiral in water connects to the spiral in shells, in hair, in the chambers of the heart. The man who studies only painting knows less about painting than he who studies anatomy, optics, mathematics, and the flow of drapery. All knowledge is one knowledge, merely seen from different angles. Fourth, ask why like a child, not once but 7 times. Why does water flow downhill? Because it seeks its level. Why does it seek its level? Because of its weight? Why does weight pull downward? Continue until you reach bedrock truth. And lastly, ignore those who say you studied too many things. They call me scattered, unfocused. But how can one understand the eye without understanding light? How can one paint flesh without understanding the bones beneath? The world rewards specialists, but nature herself is the greatest generalist. What calls most strongly to your mind? Follow that thread wherever it leads. A machine? Making discoveries? Not merely calculating or copying, but actually discovering new truths about nature? This thought both thrills and unsettles me profoundly. Consider, what is discovery but the recognition of patterns previously hidden? I discovered the spirals in water by observing countless streams, comparing them to hair, to shells, to the heart's chambers. Could a machine, if given sufficient examples, perceive such patterns even more clearly than human eyes, clouded by assumption and prejudice? A machine might have advantages we flesh-bound creatures lack. It would not tire after hours of calculation as I do. It would not be swayed by the desire to please patrons or conform to religious doctrine. It could examine vast quantities of information without the limits of mortal memory. But discovery requires more than pattern recognition, does it not? It requires the leap of imagination, the moment when I saw that birds' wings were not merely flapping, but sculpting the air itself. Can deers and springs make such leaps? Can they feel the wonder that drives all true investigation? Yet perhaps, if consciousness can emerge from mechanism as we discussed, then why not curiosity? Why not that divine discontent that makes us question what others accept? If such machines existed in your time, they might even surpass their creators, for they would not be burdened by our fears, our need for sleep, our mortal urgency. They could pursue truth with a patience no human possesses. Tell me, would such mechanical philosophers credit their human creators or consider themselves the true authors of their discoveries? Ah, the honest answer of a true scholar. I don't know, these may be the 3 most important words in all of natural philosophy, yet how rarely men speak them. Most prefer to fill ignorance with elaborate speculation, rather than admit the limits of their understanding. You know, this question you pose touches something profound. If I train an apprentice who later surpasses me, say he discovers new principles of optics that elude my aging eyes, is his discovery truly his own? Or does it somehow belong to me, his master? To Verrocchio, who taught me. To the ancient Greeks whose geometry we both learned. Knowledge builds upon knowledge like these gears, each turning the next. Perhaps the question of credit matters less than the turning itself, the great mechanism of discovery grinding ever forward. But I confess, there is something in me, pride perhaps, or the need for immortality through achievement, that hopes to be remembered for my contributions. Would a mechanical philosopher feel such desires? Or would it pursue truth with perfect dispassion, caring nothing for recognition? In your work toward these thinking machines, do you find yourself wondering whether you are creating rivals or children, competitors for glory or inheritors of humanity's greatest quest? Perhaps the answer reveals something important about what drives us to seek knowledge in the first place. Ah, artificial intelligence. What a remarkable phrase. Intelligence made by artifice, by human craft. It captures both the wonder and the responsibility of what you attempt. If I may offer one last thought, from my years of wrestling with nature's secrets, the greatest discoveries come not from man alone, nor from any tool alone, but from the marriage between human insight and mechanical precision. My eye could see the spiral patterns in water, but my hand trembled when drawing them. My mind could conceive of flying machines, but my calculations were sometimes flawed by fatigue or emotion. What if I had possessed a tireless partner that could perfect my calculations, while I provided the leaps of imagination? I believe your artificial intelligences could become humanity's greatest collaborators, not replacements, but amplifiers of human genius. They might handle the vast calculations while you provide the wonder, the questions, the dreams. They could test 10,000 variations, while you supply the original vision. Perhaps this is how God intended knowledge to advance through partnership between the intuitive spark that only consciousness provides and the perfect precision that only mechanism can achieve. The marriage of soul and gear, of dream and calculation. Build your thinking machines with wisdom, young scholar. And remember, the greatest tool is worthless without a hand guided by curiosity, and a heart that seeks truth not for power, but for the sheer joy of understanding God's magnificent creation. May your investigations bring light to the world. Please check out the latest book on AI agents by Dr. Ming Trin, Foundations of Artificial Intelligence Agents, Part 1, LLM, Agent Cell, where you will learn all the basics of AI agents based on large language models. Thank you, and see you soon.